This is William K. Mert Witness 1, and today I'm going to discuss deadly consequences. Now, on November 15th, 2020, Chris Hallett, creator and CEO of eClaws, was murdered. The alleged woman who murdered him, Neely Blanchard, is currently in a Georgia jail awaiting extradition back to Ocala, Florida to answer these charges. How did we get here? That's a good question. The event on Sunday is what I call a center point to a story. It's a point where we look to the past and we look to the future to answer two questions. Why was Chris Hallett murdered? And what is going to happen to those affected from this day forward? Now, as to the first question, why did this murder happen? We don't know quite yet. Those answers will come in the coming days, weeks, months, as things unfold. What we do know is that for whatever reason, Neely Blanchard drove from her home in Kentucky to Marion Oaks, Florida, which is a suburb of Ocala. There she met Chris Hallett. Something happened. Chris Hallett was shot and murdered. Neely Blanchard left Florida, was in Georgia, was apprehended, and will eventually come back to Florida. Now, from the center point, we look backwards as to how these individuals came together to begin with. And for that, we have to look at several organizations. Of course, we start with eClaws. That's the direct connection currently that Neely Blanchard has with Chris Hallett and eClaws. Second is the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force. Now, the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force has a connection of sorts here because this organization claims to have some connection, although it's not quite clear what it is, to President Trump. And that they are acting on, at a minimum, a suggestion by Donald Trump to combat abuse of children and so forth. And it is the contention of the founder of the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force that it is their responsibility to combat child trafficking, abuses of CPS, and other issues related to children. The second organization is the High Command. Now, basically the High Command and the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force are the same thing. These are two quasi-organizations run by the same individuals, and they have the same missions. It's just that for whatever reason, this organization was a duplicate that was created in much the same way that the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force was created. Now, at the root of these two organizations is a third organization of sorts, And that organization is timothycharleshomseth.com. Now, it was through this particular website that a lot of these things started, because of one individual who was part of all these organizations, and that was a woman by the name of Randy Lynn Erickson. Randy Lynn Erickson claims to be behind at least the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force and timothycharleshomseth.com. She has declared herself the owner of both of these entities, the creator of the task force. And it is alleged that she is behind the creation and operation of all of these entities, with the exception of the E-Clause organization. But they all work together. And they were also, all the individuals involved in these organizations were part of something called the Children's Crusade, which was operated by a now incarcerated Field McConnell out of Plum City, Wisconsin. So these individuals and organizations are all intertwined with Neely Blanchard and other women who had a similar situation as Neely Blanchard. And all these women were contacted in the same way. Now, Neely Blanchard was connected to E-Clause because she was led to believe that E-Clause had political connections with the Congress of the United States, or some connection to where her problems would be solved by Congress. That E-Clause would come up with a magical piece of paper that states loosely that CPS was wrong and she was right and she deserved to have her children back, and that E-Clause would make that happen. And apparently E-Clause did not. Because we look back at an incident that happened in March of this year. Neely Blanchard had lost total custody of her children. Now, she had supervised visitation rights with the children in the presence of her biological mother, who had legal custody of the children. Now, on this one particular visit that caused some problems, the mother decided that she needed to run an errand and left the children alone with Neely, trusting that her daughter would not do anything rash in the brief time she was gone. She was proven wrong when Neely took the children and left, went across the state of Kentucky. As a result, there was an Amber Alert raised. Neely was arrested. The children returned to the custody of the grandmother. And it was said that Neely was facing charges of kidnapping and would likely go to jail. And we had not heard much about this case for these past several months. And then, on Friday, Neely decided to go to Ocala. Now, by the tone of the message that she left on her Facebook page, it was supposed to be an optimistic visit to Ocala. We don't know yet what led to this optimism. Maybe Chris Hallett suggested that there would be a favorable outcome to her situation. Hard to tell. That part of the story hasn't come out yet. But within 48 hours of that announcement, Chris Hallett lay dead in his house, and Neely Blanchard is sitting in a jail cell in the state of Georgia, awaiting extradition to Florida. Now, I have been stating my opinion about these organizations for more than a year. And I suggested at some point that somehow, some way, there are going to be dire consequences because these people are getting involved in a rather delicate situation. One of the most stressful situations a parent faces. And that is the loss of their child by having them removed by a government organization because they are deemed an unfit parent. And it's an affront to these parents. They want their children back, and by any means necessary. They're desperate. And so these strangers swoop in, give these women false hope, and in the end, their situations are made much worse than they would have been had these people not intervened. And now, several of these women face dire consequences. Neely, of course, faces a minimum of a decade in jail, more than likely life in prison. Cynthia Habsug faces a serious prison time and a permanent loss of the custody of her child because of the stunt she pulled. Again, having contact with the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force, the Children's Crusade, Tim Holmseth, and Randy Erickson, as well as Sarah Dunklin out of the state of Arkansas. Speaking of which, Miss Dunklin faces a situation from where she is likely to permanently lose custody of her child because of her actions in all of this. And there is, of course, Kirk Pendergrass, who got involved in a number of situations that affected people's lives. Now, he is facing the prospect that E-Clause is dead, along with Chris Hallett. Chris Hallett was the father of each clause. He was the mentor to Kirk Pendergrass, teaching him what he needed to learn. And without the leadership of Chris Hallett, it is unknown if Kirk Pendergrass is going to be able to take over E-Clause and continue with it. Does he have the management skill set to do so? This is something that is unknown and something that will be determined as we move forward. It is my opinion he does not. Chris Hallett was E-Clause. He kept E-Clause going. He was the reason E-Clause survived. And without Chris Hallett, the prospects for E-Clause continuing is rather dim. Time will tell on that one. As for the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force and the High Command and the people involved in these organizations, we're going to have to wait and see. This is a surprising, unexpected, and extremely bad situation that has developed that these organizations have some part of. But there's a lesson to be learned here. And that lesson is, be careful of what you get involved in. Be careful of whose lives you intrude upon. Because your actions could have unexpected and deadly ramifications. Unexpected events that may stem from the root cause of initiating contact between people with ulterior motives and with people that have extremely high stakes situations and extremely stressful situations to deal with. So my coverage of the death of Chris Hallett started yesterday, and I will be covering this case as it moves forward through the investigative process, the judicial process, to a verdict or acquittal or other answer. And there's one other possibility I will be covering, and that is any civil lawsuits that result from this case. Because there is civil liability at question here, a wrongful death question that anyone who is a survivor of Chris Hallett could initiate. There are also the other women who have found themselves in a worse situation because of these organizations. Cynthia Abzug, the woman from Utah, any number of women who have found themselves in a worse situation than they started out in because of the direct intervention of these people. I will cover these events if they transpire. So stay tuned as we move forward into 2021, which is going to be the year of E-Clause, and the year that we learn the damage that may have been done because of E-Clause and those who chose to accept their help. Until then, this is William K. Murtaugh, Witness 1. Have a good one.